Hey everyone, it's Justin again. This unit, we're going to focus on functions. But first we have to ask, what is a function? A function is a relationship between two values, an input and an output. The best way to think about it is kind of like a clothes dryer. You input wet clothes, allow the dryer to perform its function, and then it spits out dry clothes for you to wear, the output. The clothes aren't new, they just had something done to them, the function of the dryer. But this is math, so we can't just put numbers into a fancy machine and right. Okay, maybe a machine isn't the best example when it comes to functions, but functions simply tell us what to do to the input value. For instance, if the function says multiply the input by 3, then subtract 2, we could input any value and receive a number back from it. Like, say we input the number 5. It gets multiplied by 3, and then we subtract 2, and the result is 13. But haven't we done something like this before? If we're going to say multiply a number by 3 and then subtract 2 to get a new number, can we just write it like this? If x is 5, then we plug it into that equation, which says to multiply it by 3 and subtract 2, and we get that y is 13. It's the same thing. Functions are essentially just equations, where the x is the input and y is the output. Well, that's not exactly true. There is one other difference. With functions, we generally don't say y. We say f of x, written like this instead. The f stands for function, as in function of x. It's pretty much the same thing as y, except it explicitly tells you what variable it's based on, x. This probably seems a little confusing, but I promise it's nothing new. Here, I'll prove it to you. If we have the equation function of x equals negative 2x plus 9, and we input 3 for x, what's the output? First, we plug in 3 for all the x's, and notice that the left side now says function of 3. We'll talk about that in a second. But for now, let's focus on the right side. Negative 2 times 3 is negative 6, plus 9 is 3. So when we input 3, the output is 3. Now, that f of 3 on the left side is actually really useful. What it means is when the input is 3, so that the final line of our work now gives the entire answer. When the input is 3, the output is 3. How would we read this equation? Well, this just says that if we input some value t, the function multiplies it by 5 and adds 1. So then what does this one say? It says that for some input d, the function will take that value and subtract 4 from it. This one isn't a function. So what does it say? It says that if the input for this function is negative 2, it outputs a value of 7. So then what does this one mean? It means when you input 0 into this function, the output will be 10. Let's try a problem. Find f of 2 for the function f of v equals 5v minus 1. First, this f of 2 here means input 2 to the function. So all we're asked to do here is input 2 in the place of all the v's. Then we simplify the right side and we get 9. There are multiple ways to express this answer. We could just leave it in equation form, f of 2 equals 9, or we can write it out in words. When the input is 2, the function's output is 9. Next, find f of negative 1 for the function f of r equals 8r plus 5. The f of negative 1 just means to input negative 1 to the function, so that's exactly what we'll do. When we simplify the right side, we get negative 3. We can either write our answer as f of negative 1 equals negative 3, or we can write it in words, like when the input is negative 1, the function's output is negative 3. The key thing to remember in this lesson, and for this entire unit, is that f of a variable is just a new way of saying y. And when that variable is replaced by a number, that number is the input to be plugged in. Remember when we first learned about equations and we were able to plug in for both x and y? In the next lesson, we're going to be doing the same thing, plugging in for the output rather than the input. See you then.